Could you ever review one of your own debates?
I thought about doing the one with VAUSH, the
I
panel I was on with VAUSH. I really did because I think he was completely fucking wrong in the argument, and I
what
may
was
have
it? I
been
didn't
able
catch
to
that
argue
one.
it a little better, but I definitely wanted to go back over it. So it started out basically being an argument about like harmful ideologies and how much we should allow people to get away with, and is anything sacred online anymore? And that turned into a conversation about, well, if somebody does have harmful ideologies, like what should be the recourse? Like, for instance, and I think this was brought up by Valish actually. Like,
Hmm.
so like if what we were talking about is basically like how you couldn't really like government mandate people with shitty ideas or whatever being like you know taken out or whatever like that.
Hmm.
But what you could do is, as a community, you could do some community policing and say, hey, you know what? Just so you guys know, this is what that dude's all about, type of thing, And then the conversation got on to, well, what if kids were involved? Like if your kid, or if there was a kid and they were taught dangerous ideologies, like for instance Nazism, right?
Hmm.
And they go to school and start to act on the ideologies that they're speaking, should that kid then be removed from the home? And the argument was, well, yeah, probably, because at that point the parent's ideology is producing like severe negative impacts that aren't just impacting the child itself, but are also impacting society because the child's acting out, trying to fulfill some of these things in Nazism. His
Hmm.
argument was, if you walk by a home and you see a Nazi flag hanging in the background, yeah, you should be able to call CPS and the kid should be taken. And I said, well, yeah, if you're going to do that, the same should be true for the Confederate flag, because the Confederate flag has also been a symbol of genocide, chattel slavery, systemic racism, abuse. As a matter of fact, the current Confederate flag, as we know it, was strictly created for the Dixiecrats during the Great Southern Strategy, as we know, which the whole purpose was to shoot down the Civil Rights Act, to deintegrate schools and return back to segregation. The whole tenet of the flag was one of major, or is one of major oppression, and it's only through 150 years of a propaganda effort that the view of the Confederacy has been softened. And I said, I don't think that there's any difference between hanging a Nazi flag in your house and hanging a Confederate flag in your house. I think they both symbolize the same thing, and I think on a moral level, neither is better. I think they both equate to the same types of atrocities, and I think that many of the people that would brandish either of those flags truly do want those things. My experience is informed by spending a lot of time living in Louisiana and hearing what the fuck these white people say to each other that they don't say to other people.
Hey,
Um,
where did you grow up in Louisiana? Because I grew up in Louisiana for my
I didn't. I
beginning.
spent my summers there, but it was in Monroe.
I before Katrina, I was in New Orleans.
Okay, they're a little bit more of a diverse culture. You do have like
Yeah,
there is a little bit more blend there, but you get on the outskirts, in some
I
of the
don't.
smaller towns and municipalities, it's a little bit of a different story.
Are you ready to hear the craziest?
Go
I'm
for
not
it.
sure whether I would agree with either review on that.
Hey, fair enough, man.
uh, yeah, I think like that could be a difficult situation. Uh, where I would get into it is I don't want to. I have like problems discriminating against someone purely on their ideology in that case. I think like actions at the end of the day might end up meaning more than like just holding a title for in one case. Like
Mm-hmm.
as terrible as it is to hold like a Nazi flag, like let's say you're like brave enough to put up a Nazi flag, right?
Mm-hmm.
That also means that you're most likely going to be doing some terrible shit to go along with it. And I'm not. I would prefer if we solely focus on like instead of because I could foresee that being like a major limitation of freedom of speech. I also think that as awful as like fascism is, it, in all fairness, we should give people some chance to change their minds in a certain degree. And I understand the argument for like removing them, but I would like, I don't know.
I'll just put it
I
this
would
way:
like,
there's no Adolf Hitler statues in Germany. You know,
I agree with that.
there's a reason for that. You know,
I'm not. I'm not sure. Like the reason that I'm uncomfortable with this is like a slippery slope argument. Is once we start defining like Nazism as bad, it would concern me that we are considered radicals in our own time.
Depending on who's in control, they could manipulate that the other way.
So
Sure,
that's like one of the things that concerns me. And it is a slippery slope argument, so it is not. So it is fallacious, but it is at least to me a little bit where I get concerned about that.
Sure, makes sense. All right.
So like I don't want my kid removed for holding a democratic social.
Sure. But democratic socialists also haven't committed chattel slavery or fucking genocided an entire population of people, you know. I think that's where the difference lies.
I mean, Lenin was a member of the Socialists of Russia. So, to be fair, unfortunately, everyone's done terrible shit. If we were judging them based on how awful their actions were, we would be holding the United States to a much higher standard.
Yeah, I agree. Because the United States is awful. And that's one of the other things he said to me that kind of pissed me off is he's like, well, you know, then why fly the American flag? You know, Americans have done fucking horrible shit, you know, to the native people. I mean, they've perpetuated genocide. You know, every time you put the flag up, you don't think that, you know, that evokes fear or pain for, you know, people who are sufferers of that. And so my reaction to that was, well, no, I actually think the American flag is pretty fucking cringe, and I personally don't fly it because I think that it's been co-opted by a lot of fucking white supremacists and racists and people like that. And if you look at who's commonly brandishing the American flag, it's not our best. It sure as fuck ain't our best, you know. It's a lot of fucking people that want really bad things to happen to good people.
Well, then you wouldn't apply that. Well, you obviously, I assume you wouldn't apply the standard that people that fly the American flag should be removed, like should have their children.
No, but I'm just saying, like he was trying to like say, oh well, people still brandish the American flag, and I'm saying, well, the American flag shit too. You know, maybe I wouldn't hold people to account because America's tried to like fix its sins per se. Is it like and not in a perfect way? We're still working on it, right? But at least there's been some attempt at trying to create some reparation of some sort, you know. I don't really see the Confederacy, you know, or the Daughters of the Confederacy running out to go fucking do a bunch of work with black people to, you know, try to do some reparations for black people. I don't see them advocating for the NAACP. You certainly don't see people brandishing the Confederate flag that are willing to go to bat for Black Lives Matter. You know, I mean, like, and if you look at the policies they tend to vote for, even now, they are still voting for policies that disenfranchise people of color. So my point being is that they're like people who brandish the Confederate flag are still actively trying to disenfranchise and hurt people of color. And if they were given the opportunity to go further with it, they absolutely would. The only reason that they can't is because we've treated them like a marginal, like, you know, we've treated them like they're on the margins, like they're pieces of shit, you know, in essence. But at any time, they could end up taking control and we could be right back where we were. I mean, if I'm telling you, if Trump gets in 2024, we're going to be dealing with a whole other shitstorm. And those guys brandishing the Confederate flags are going to be the same guys that were at the January 6th rally, and they're going to be even more emboldened. And yeah, I think you could see a ripple effect where, remember, Hitler didn't take control until World War II. Like, he didn't really have major control until World War II. You know, he was even out of power, I think, for a few years and then got back into power. Like, I'm seeing the duplication with Trump right now. Like, it's almost to the point where it's a little bit scary. But yeah. I do think that if you get the wrong right-wing populists into office with those Confederate sympathizers, they would be more than happy to return to a system of slavery or Jim Crow, systems like that. I think they'd be perfectly fine with more sundown towns and shit like that. It's just where I'm at with it. I think materially they have more opportunity to make changes for the worse for the very people that they marginalized in the first place.
Let me run you by a scenario why I would even disagree with Josh saying people for having the Nazi flag, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that we're living in a perfect state, right? And when perfect, I mean like as preferable as we could assume,
Sure.
right? When we're looking at these scenarios, let's say that there's a dude that is pretty stupid and manages to become a Nazi. And however, he's taking perfect care of his kids, and he's like not mistreating them in any capacity outside of teaching them very. And we have a school system in place that the child is attending, which will challenge these ideas and correct these ideas, and hopefully point out why a lot of the arguments of the father are not as good as they could be. And then the kid could potentially be moved, and the father, even though he's a Nazi, is like okay with his having different ideological systems than him. And if the kid doesn't change, I guess it's kind of up to the kid. Now, the second the father does anything to harm the kid or do any actions, I'm fine with them being taken away. But I'm not sure I would like fully consider just having an ideology and teaching your kids to be something worthy of having your child taken away. Now, obviously, that's a very it's in a vacuum that allows for the situation to happen.
Sure.
And I agree with that. But I think that the reason that the reason why it's important to look at a vacuum is if you're teaching a kid these like terrible ideas, there's probably some other shit going on that's more worthwhile reason to take away the kid.
Yeah, well, and my argument was the framing came up is that the kid was acting on the teachings that he was being given, right? Like for instance, being a Nazi, seeing a Jewish kid and beating the shit out of him, or doing shit like that, like actually actively meeting out the ideology in praxis as a child in a school, like. At that point, I think you have to look at, like, is that ideology harmful? And it even though that child may be harming another child, it's still, at that point, now it's harmful to that child.
Yeah, I agree. But I also wouldn't say that's necessarily taking ideology. That's purely taking them away because they're doing harm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's why I said the measure has to be, like, how far the child goes.
So, like, if the child acts on it, I would say it's fine. That's also way. Because of what they believe, it's because they did material harm, and that's entirely separate.
Yeah, and further, the parents encourage that material harm to take place. That's my big thing. Like the parents encouraging the child to commit material harm. That's where my issue was with it.
As weird as it is, I think you could create a scenario where a parent's a Nazi, but they're still a perfectly good parent, and they're still a perfectly good member of society. And you could make arguments that just spreading these ideas are harmful in their own capacity, and I would agree with those arguments. But I'm not sure if it truly warrants like the child being taken away.
Sure, and I guess at the root of it all, like what it came down to is like even removed from the child being taken away, it was is somebody who brandishes the Nazi flag as morally abhorrent as somebody who brandishes the Confederate flag? Or are they one and the same? Or do they match? And VAUSH's argument was people that brandish the Nazi flag are much more morally bankrupt than somebody who would brandish the Confederate flag. And I said, no, I think they're one and the same. I don't see a distinct difference. And at the root of it, the people who would brandish a Nazi flag and the people who would brandish the Confederate flag, I think both of them in some way will act on that ideology, whether it's at the voting booth or elsewhere. Now, whether or not they commit acts of violence and should have their kids taken away, that's a different story. But are they both equally morally abhorrent? Yeah, I 100% believe that.
And Mike, I think you could consider this a debate, but I'm just not sure I would fully agree with that take. Because I do think I could make an argument I think there are two sides of this argument that I can see it from, right? From the how terrible their ideology is and how person, I agree with you. They're just as bad, right? And I actually think VAUSH would probably agree with you that maybe like Nazis are worse, but they're both abhorrent ideologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think like the situation that we're unfortunately in is, yeah, you can make this a segment, Mike. The situation that we're unfortunately within is, I don't think like putting a like, so for example, let's say that for some reason 80% of the country started believing that abortion should be made illegal and that you should kill the woman for getting an abortion and you should kill the doctor for performing an abortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's a sick ideology and that is like horrid, but because of the popularization of it, saying that that should be discouraged and that it is a widely like accessible thing does change it a little bit. And you would agree with me that the Confederate flag is more widely used than the Nazi flag.
It is. Yeah, no, I would agree. I would concur with that.
And while I would agree that whether one is more or less harmful is non doesn't even really matter in this case. What it comes down to is like practicality. If we removed the every kid, like let's just use removing a kid. If we removed every kid from of someone who held a Confederate flag, that would look very different from everyone who hung a Nazi flag.
Oh, sure, sure. And that's why, you know, when I was even speaking with VAUSH about it, I preface, like, I mean, there'd have to be harm, you know, actual, like, there would have to be physical harm of some sort. Like, it would have to result in something beyond just, I have this ideology, right? You know,
Yeah.
like,
And like you can justify harm. I live in the South. I have friends whose parents proudly wave Confederate flags. I have gay friends whose parents proudly wave Confederate flags, and it sucks. But like, if we're saying, like, I completely agree with, like, no, 100% that immediately goes.
mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they're like. I think there is a distinctive difference between the conservative and the Nazi flag in this specific case. Like, for example, it would be impractical to like jail. Let's say you are a an up and coming late like in the you're a part of some party in the Weimar Republic, and
Mm-hmm.
the Nazi flag is getting more and more popular. In that case, they hold a terrible ideology, but I'm not sure you could like justify, because of how prevalent it is, jailing everyone who like waves that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I wouldn't encourage that either, because that, you know, again, you're infringing on free speech. There'd have to be actual action. That's why it moved from like being about specifically like the government intervention portion of it to just basically like, you know, you got to weight that, like, that's, it came down to like, can you weight them both the same? Right. And that's why I came down on the side of, yeah, because I know black people who are still suffering because of what happened with the Confederacy. You know, I know people who still bear the generational scars, you know, from what happened with the Confederacy and what happened with slavery. And so because of that, because it is so material, I guess, in the immediacy around me personally, I think that's why I take such a strong stand against it. Whereas materially, while I do know of some Jewish people who definitely lost family because of the Nazis, and I think it's an abhorrent ideology. I think it's fucking disgusting. I think if you talk about what has more of a chance of taking root in this country again, and what has more chance of an immediate impact on, you know, like detrimental impact on, you know, minority populations and things like that, you're going to find it with the people that hold the Confederate flags, because they're the ones that are going to the polls to vote for those kinds of ideologies, i.e. The voting laws in, I lost being the good socialist that I am. I share those resources.
Where were we? We were talking about some dramatic stuff.
So no, what I was saying is that the harmful ideology of like those who really sympathize to the Confederacy is can be expressed more in its immediacy here in the United States through electoral politics than those who would ascribe to like Nazism. And I think that's the big difference is like, well, I think if you look at the scale and the length of time, obviously Nazis were prevalent for a lot longer. And, you know, as far as at least as we've known, have been able to count the numbers, you know, probably because of the industrialized death machine they created, you know, you could argue easily that, you know, yes, they probably had a more vast and immediate impact in their in the peak of their existence than did the Confederacy, which didn't last nearly as long. However, the ability for Confederate-leaning people to actually, or Confederate sympathizing people to actually make and create and change policy in the country that would negatively impact people is way more prevalent and way, you know, we see it. I mean, there are still sundown towns in this country. You know, there are still towns where you cannot be in the town after dark if you're black. Like, so that's where I'm like, okay, you know, I do think that the Confederacy right now, you know, in our current society, because of the power that they hold, can be much more detrimental to society. Thereby, I think, even though both morally are probably on similar grounds, I think the immediacy of threat lies more in Confederate sympathizers than I do in Nazi sympathizers. I just don't think they have the power or the ability to gain power because they've been so marginalized as a whole and they're considered so much on the outs. Whereas a lot of people have exercised Confederate apologia for many years. We had 150 years of propaganda campaign through the Lost Cause of people softening the view of the Confederacy, even though the ideals are still strong within the people who espouse it, you know. And so that's kind of my thing on it. That's why I now see, you got to remember with VAUSH, I was simply saying that I think they are even, they're equitable as far as their moral depravity. And VAUSH was arguing that someone who would brandish the Nazi flag is more morally abhorrent, and I just think I think they're equal. I think it's an equal. I think they're both equally as bad.
I think you could make a potential argument. It's not one that I'm interested in making. Like, while I'm all interested in nuance, I'm not going to elaborate on on how much better slave owners are than people who literally like genocided 6 million Jews.
Sure,
but both morally abhorrent. You could have an interesting discussion on like the differences in their specific morality, and like for example, like in a specific scenario, you have like an election for your next president, and you're stuck between a someone who like you time travel. You have Hitler or you have Robert E. Lee, and those are your only two options to become the president of the United States. I could see arguments that going towards like Robert E. Lee would be better, but I don't really care.
I'd just kick them both in the fucking teeth and vote third party. In Roblox, of course, in Roblox.
I think, okay, if in Roblox, but if Twitch really got mad at us for kicking Hitler in the teeth, I would feel very strongly about some of the policy prescriptions of Twitch.
Wholeheartedly agree. You never know with Bezos, though. You never know. You never know.
Well, you know, luckily enough, we don't have to work under Bezos anymore. He's retired. Yeah. We're no longer Bezos employees.
Thank goodness.
But I would have serious problems if Twitch truly thought that we were not allowed to do our American duty and kick Nazis in the teeth.